On the
Hello
26th
everyone,
of February,
and welcome back to my channel.
2025. I know many of you are here to find
his
a
11-year-old
peace,
sister
to let the chaos of the day drift away as you
in
unwind.
Lakewood Ranch, Florida.
So before we
Alongside
begin,
their mother,
please get
tonight,
comfortable.
Adjust
Story.
your pillows.
The community
Pull the
of
blanket
Lakewood
up to
Ranch
your chin,
sits in Manatee
and let the
County
darkness
in the
of the
western
room
part of
wrap
the state
around
of
you,
Florida,
like a
and
protective
it is the kind of
shield.
place that,
If
if
you
we
were
tell
to
these
describe it
stories
to
to
someone
remember
who
the
had never
names
been
of those
there,
lost, you would
and to
reach
find
almost
order in the
immediately
chaos.
for words like peaceful
Tonight,
and planned.
we
and
travel to the
quietly
vast
beautiful.
open skies of Arizona,
Because Lakewood Ranch
where the
is one of
horizon
the largest
stretches
and most
endlessly,
deliberately
and the
designed
secrets of
master
the
planned
desert
communities
are buried beneath
in the
the winter
entire United
stars.
States.
I wonder
A
what
community
time it
that
is
was
where
built
you are
not
right
just
now.
as a collection of houses
Perhaps
and streets,
the house is quiet,
but as an
and
integrated
the rest
vision
of the world has
of what
gone to
residential
sleep.
life
Or
could
maybe
look
you are
like
taking a pain
when every
enforced
detail
nap,
is attended to
needing a
with
voice
care
to distract
and
you from the
intentionality.
discomfort.
And the roads
Wherever
that
you
wind
are,
through Lakewood
and whatever
Ranch
burdens you are carrying,
lined with mature
you are
trees
safe here,
and carefully
we are
maintained
awake
landscaping.
together.
And the neighborhoods
Tonight,
within it
we follow a
are
journey
organized
that spans
around
across
lakes and
state
parks
lines,
and nature
through
preserves
the digital
and walking
signals
trails
that connect us,
and the community
and into
has
the
its own
quiet
schools
resolution
and its own
of a
shopping
family's
districts
questions.
and its own medical
It
facilities.
is a story about the fragility
and it is
of
the kind of
trust
place where
and the
families
invisible
come with the
footprints
intention
we
of
leave
staying
behind in the
with the
digital
intention
world.
of building something.
But before we walk that
of
path,
putting down roots in
let
the
us
warm
settle
Florida
into the
soil
landscape.
and watching their children
The
grow
Arizona
up
desert
in a place
in January
that feels safe
is a place
and beautiful
of stark
and
contrasts.
full of possibility.
During the day,
And Manatee County
the sun
itself
bleaches the
is
color
a
from
county
the
of
earth,
enormous natural wealth,
turning the scrub brush
situated
into
on the
brittle
Gulf
skeletons
Coast of
of
Florida,
gray
just
and
south
brown.
of Tampa Bay.
But as the sun dips
county
below
of
the
beaches
mountains
and
the
waterways
heat
and wetlands
evaporates instantly,
and the kind of slow golden
replaced
light
by a
that the
sudden
Florida
deep
Gulf
chill
Coast
that
carries
settles
into
into the
late
bones.
afternoon, when the sun
It is a landscape
dropping
of
toward
straight
the water,
lines and long
and everything
horizons,
it touches
where the
turns
city lights of
amber
Phoenix
and warm,
bleed slowly
and the
into
town
the shadow
of
of
Lakewood
the mountains.
Ranch, which is
The city of
technically
Tolleson
an
sits
unincorporated
within this
community
sprawling
in the
county,
county, rather
It is
than
a
a
place of
municipality
industry
with
and
its
residence,
own government, where the hum
has
of the
grown
I-10
significantly
freeway
over
is
the
a
past
constant
2 decades,
low-frequency
as
vibration
Florida's
in the
population
air.
has expanded.
At 2 in the morning,
and as more and
the
more
sodium
families
street
have
lights
sought out
cast
exactly the
specific
kind
shade
of
of intentional,
orange over the empty
well-resourced
parking
living
lots,
environment,
a heavy
Lakewood Ranch
artificial
offers,
glow that
and
makes the
within
shadows
Lakewood Ranch,
stretch long
there are
and
several
thin
distinct
across the
neighborhoods
asphalt
and communities.
The air is
Each
dry,
with its own character,
tasting of dust
and its own
and distant
amenities,
rain that never
and
seems
one
to
of those
fall.
communities
In these
is
quiet
the Lake
hours,
Club,
the apartment
which is a
complexes
gated
look
residential
identical,
development within
row
Lakewood
after
Ranch
row of beige
that offers
stucco
homes
and
of a
closed
certain
doors,
scale,
and
each
a certain
one holding
finish.
1,000
The
different
kind of
lives
neighborhood
in
where the
suspended
driveways
animation.
are long,
and the
we
lots
often
are
believe
generous,
that our safety
and
lies
the community
in the physical
clubhouse offers
in the
kind
locks
of
on our
amenities
doors that make
and
a
the
neighborhood
fences
feel
around
like
our
a
yards.
destination rather than just
We
a
teach
place
ourselves
to sleep.
to fear the dark
And it was
alley
within
or
the
the
Lake
unlit
Club
street
that the family at the
but
center
in
of
the modern
tonight's
age,
story had made
the
their
danger
home.
does not always
A
hide
family
in the
that had
shadows of the
relocated
physical
from the
world.
state of Missouri approximately
Sometimes
3 years
it
before
arrives
the
through
events
the
of
soft
February
blue
26th.
glow of a screen.
A family
Carried
that had
on a
come to this
signal that
carefully
passes through
curated corner
walls
of
as
Florida's
easily
Gulf
as a
Coast
ghost.
and settled into a home
18
there.
is an age
And
of
the neighbors
open
around
doors,
them,
and the
it is a
community
threshold,
that surrounded them,
a moment in time
and the
where the
streets
world
that they
feels
walked,
vast and
and the
waiting
lakes
to be
that
known.
they could see from their
For
windows.
Yesenia Norman, who was
were the
known to her
backdrop
friends
of
and
the
family
ordinary
as
daily
Cece,
life of 2 children
18 was just
who
the
deserved
beginning.
every ordinary day they had.
She was a beautiful
and every
and bright
ordinary
young
day
woman
that was still waiting
standing
for them.
on the precipice
And
of
I want you
adulthood,
to hold that image,
looking out at a future that
the
seemed
image
to
of this
offer
community
endless
and
possibilities.
this street and this home. as it
Yesenia was living
before
in a
the
time
evening
of transition,
February 26th,
quite literally.
before
She
the
was a
deputies
resident
arrived,
at a transitional
and
before the
facility
world
contracted
outside
with the
learned
Arizona
what had happened
Department of
inside.
Child Safety.
Because
To
that
some,
image
such
of
a place might
ordinariness,
sound clinical,
of the quiet,
a sterile
and the
institution
landscape
of rules and
the
regulations.
carefully tended lives of a neighborhood.
But for those living
that had
within
never
its
had a
walls,
reason to draw law
it was a
enforcement
home,
attention,
however
is
temporary,
the image that makes the contrast.
It was a place
what
of
happened
communal
on that
hallways
Thursday
where the
evening,
floorboards
so
creaked under the
and
weight
so
of passing
devastating.
footsteps,
and the rain
and where the
outside
view from the
falls
window
softly
offered
as we
a
stay
glimpse
with that
of the
image
wider
for a
world
moment
she
before
was
we move
preparing to
forward. hunter. The
Her
two
relationship
children who
with
were
her
found
mother,
in that house
Jessica
on the evening
Nunez,
of February 26th,
was the tether that kept
have
her
not
grounded.
been publicly named. It
At
was
the
the
time of
bond
this
of a
recording.
parent watching a
And
child
this is something
grow up.
that deserves acknowledgement
That bittersweet
and respect.
mixture of
Because
pride
the
and
decision
worry
of law
that comes
enforcement
with seeing a
agencies
daughter
and
navigate the
families
world
to
on
withhold
her
the
own
names
terms.
of child victims from the public
Jessica
record
saw Cece
is
not
a
just as a
decision that is
daughter,
made in service
but as a
of
light,
privacy and
a
dignity.
young woman with a vibrant
And it is
spirit
a decision that
who
we
is
honor
eager
here
to
by
connect,
referring
to
these
love,
children
and to be
not
loved.
by names. We do
But the
not
search
have
for
the right
connection
to use
is a vulnerable thing,
but by the truth of who they were.
In a city of millions,
And the truth
loneliness
of who
can
they
still
were
find
is
a way
this.
to settle in.
There was a 14-year-old
And like
boy,
so many others of her
and
generation,
there was an 11-year-old girl.
Yesenia looked for that
and they
connection
were siblings
in the palm of her hand.
and they were living their lives.
The digital
in a
world
house
offers the
in
illusion of
Lakewood Ranch,
intimacy
Florida,
without the immediate
on a
risk
street
of
in a
proximity.
neighborhood
It allows
where
us
the
to
lawns were
curate
green
our
and the
lives,
lakes were still,
to present the
and
best
ordinary
versions of
rhythms of
ourselves,
daily life moved
and to
along
believe
their
that the
familiar
person on the
tracks.
other end of the
And
message
14
is
years
doing
old
the same.
is an age that carries
Trust
its
is
own
often built
particular
on the
weight
fragile foundation
and its
of
own
words
particular kind of
typed
presence
into the silence of the night.
14 is an
A
age
message
when a
sent,
young person is beginning to
a
move
notification
toward the
received.
self they are going to be.
A small dopamine
When the
hit
interest
that feels
and
like
the
affection.
friendships and the passions that will
For
define
Yesenia,
them are starting
the phone
to
was a
solidify
lifeline
into
to
a
something
world of potential
recognizable.
romance. A way
When
to
they are old
bypass
enough
the
to have
awkwardness of
opinions
chance
and
encounters
preferences
and
and
to
a
find
sense of
someone
the
who
world
seemed to be
that
looking
is
for the
distinctly
same
their
things
own
she was,
and young
enough that everything is still
It was in
the
this
process
digital
of
space
becoming that she crossed paths.
and
with
11
Randall
years old
Santillan is an age that
He was
still
27
belongs
years old,
entirely to childhood,
nearly a decade
in
her
the
senior.
best and the most protected
To an
sense.
18-year-old,
27
11 is the
can
age
feel like
of
a lifetime
imagination
of experience
and of the close friendships
a maturity
that feel
that
like
is
the whole
attractive
world,
and reassuring.
of the
The messages
passions
that
that
have
flowed
not yet
between
been
them,
touched by
invisible
self-consciousness,
threads weaving a connection
of the kind of energy
that felt
fills
real,
a room without trying,
even if they had never stood
and
at
these
the
two
same
children.
room. We
A
leave pieces of
14-year-old
ourselves
boy
everywhere
and
we
an
go.
11-year-old girl
Echoes in the data that
We're
tell
living
the story
exactly the kind
when
of
we
life
cannot.
that children at those ages,
And as the days
should
in
be
January
living.
ticked by,
They were in
those
school.
digital echoes were painting
They were
a
in a
picture
community
of a meeting that was about to
They were
take
surrounded
place.
by the structures
On the
and
evening of
relationships
January 15th,
and the daily
the winter
routines
air in
that make
Phoenix
up a
was
childhood.
crisp.
The sun
And the
had
home
set
they
early,
lived in was their
casting the
home.
valley into that deep,
The place
desert
that was supposed to
darkness.
be the safest place in
Yesenia
the
made a
world for
decision.
them. She
The place
decided
where the
to bridge
doors
the
closed
gap
against
between the
whatever
digital
was
world
difficult about
and
the
physical
outside,
one,
and where the
she
people
told
who
friends
loved them
she was
were
going to meet
closest.
someone.
And that home,
It was a simple
in
plan,
the family's 3
born
years
of
in
the
Lakewood
optimism
Ranch,
of youth,
had been
She
a
stepped
home
out
with
of
no
the history of
transitional
police
facility.
calls.
The
No
door
incidents
clicking shut
recorded
behind
at that
her,
address,
and walked into
no
the
moments
cool
that had
night
drawn the
air.
attention of law
She
enforcement.
was unaware
or
that she was
suggested to
stepping out
anyone
of
in
the safety
community
of the known
that something
and
was
into
wrong.
a silence that would soon
And I want
envelop
you to
an
pause
entire
here for just a
community.
moment.
The
sit
city
with
lights
that.
flickered in the distance
Because it is
indifferent
important
and steady.
It is one of the most
The
important
cars on the
details
freeway
in this
rushed
story.
by, carrying
The
people
fact
to
that
their
this
homes
house
and
and
their
this
family
family
existed in the world,
But for
in
Yesenia,
a way that gave
the
no
journey was
visible
leading her
indication
toward an apartment
of what was
in
building
Tolleson,
inside it, and a door
and the
that
rain
was waiting
outside
to
falls
be closed
gently
as we stay with
Hello,
that.
everyone.
The family
and
whose
welcome
lives
back
came
to
to
the
their
channel.
end on the evening of
I know
February
many of you are
26th,
here tonight to find a moment of
2025,
peace,
was a family
to
of
let the
4,
heavy weight of the day
a father
drift
and
away
a mother
as you fall
and their
asleep.
2 children.
So please,
And 3
get
years
comfortable.
before the events of
You
that
are joining
February
us
evening,
for a pain-enforced.
they had made the decision
You are joining
to leave
us
the
for a
state of Missouri
pain-enforced nap,
and to relocate
or
to
simply
Florida,
looking to
the
quiet
Gulf
a racing
Coast,
mind.
to the master plan
Know that you are in
community
a
of
safe
Lakewood
space.
Ranch and the gated
We
neighborhood
tell
of
these
the Lake
stories
Club.
not to unsettle
And this
the
kind
spirit,
of move,
but to remember
this
the
kind
names
of
of those
deliberate
lost,
relocation,
and to find
to
a sense of
place that
order
has
in
been
the chaos
chosen
of
for
the
the waking
quality
world.
of its community.
Tonight,
And the
we
safety
follow a
of its
journey that
environment
spans across
and the
state
opportunities
lines it offers
through the digital
to children
signals that connect us,
is the kind
and
of
into the
move
quiet
that
resolution
families make
of a
when
family's
they are thinking
questions.
about the future.
Tonight,
We travel
they are
to the
asking
vast,
themselves
open
what kind
skies
of life
they want to
Arizona
build, and what kind of
It is a
environment
place
they
where
want
the
their
earth
children to grow
remembers
up
the
in.
heat long after
And the
the
family
sun
had
has
built
set.
a life in Lakewood Ranch.
In January,
the
had settled
transition
into
from
the rhythm day to night in the
community
desert is sudden,
had
and
enrolled the
absolute.
children in school.
The scorching presence of
had
the
become,
afternoon sun
in whatever
fades,
way a family
replaced
becomes
almost
part
instantly
of a new place
by a deep penetrating chill
of the life
that
of that
settles
place
over the valley. And the father,
The wind
who is
whistles low
described
through
in the
the
official
scrub brush and the
communications from the
cactus.
Manatee County Sheriff's
sound that
Office
has
as the
echoed here
homeowner
for centuries,
was
long
on the evening
before
of
the
February
pavement was laid.
26th. Not at home.
The city of Tolleson
He was
sits
abroad
within this landscape.
He was in South
A
America,
part of the sprawling grid
away
of
from the
Phoenix
house in
Valley.
Lakewood Ranch, on a trip
From
whose
above,
nature and purpose
the city
have
is a
not been made
collection
a
of
matter
straight
of public
lines
record
and long horizons.
And I want to
where
say
the amber
something
glow
about
of
that
street
detail
lights bleeds
about
slowly
the father
into
being
the
in
shadow
South
of the
America,
surrounding mountains.
because it is not a detail
It is a
that
landscape
tells us
of
anything
geometry
definitive
and order,
about this family's
where residential
circumstances
blocks
or
and
dynamics.
apartment complexes look
People travel
identical
for
in the
work
dark.
and for many other reasons.
In the cool air
and
of
the
a
fact that a
January
parent
night,
is traveling does
sound
not by
travels
itself
for miles.
indicate anything
The distant
unusual
hum of
about
the
a
freeway,
family. The bark of
but
a
it is
dog
the
3
detail
streets
that
over,
sets the events of
the
February
closing of a car
26th
door into motion. Everything is amplified
because it was
by
the
the dry
father.
atmosphere from his location in
It is
South
a setting
America,
that feels both
who
expansive
first
and
became
intimate,
concerned, where
who
neighbors
first
lived
recognized
stacked
that
beside
something was
neighbors,
wrong,
separated
who
only
noticed
by
that he was
thin
not
walls,
able to reach
and
his
the
wife
silence
and his
of
children,
the desert night.
that his calls and
As
his
the stars
messages
began to
were
appear
going
over
over
the
the
valley
valley
on this
in a way
particular
that
evening,
felt different
the
from
city
the ordinary
seemed
entirely
delays
ordinary,
and silences of travel
but in the
time
quiet
zones
corners
and
of
busy
a digital
schedules,
map,
and
a
it was
signal
the
was
father
pulsing,
who made the decision,
marking the
to
beginning
contact
of a
someone in
story
Florida
that would leave a
and to
permanent
request
mark
that a
on this
welfare check
stillness.
be conducted at the family home.
The signal on the map
and that
stopped
decision
moving at a specific
made from
coordinate
thousands
in
of miles
Tolleson.
away.
It pointed to
Across
an
an
apartment
ocean
complex
that looked
by
like
a man who
100
was
others
trying
in
to
the
understand
valley. why his family
The
was not
sprawling grid
answering.
of stucco and glass
was the action
designed
that led
for privacy,
deputies to the door of the
yet
house
built
in
with
Lakewood
walls
Ranch
thin
on
enough
that
to
Thursday
share the
evening.
rhythm of a neighbor's life.
And I want you to hold
The
on to that
complex
image too.
sat under the orange glow
The image of a
sodium
father
street
far
lights.
from home, reaching across
The shadows
a distance
here
he
were
could
long
not physically
and sharp,
cross,
to
stretching
do the
across
only
the
thing he
asphalt
could do
parking
from
where
lot,
he was,
where cars
sat silent
to call
and
for
cold.
someone to go and check on
Randall
the people he
Santillan
loved,
lived behind
and
one
the
of these
rain
identical
falls
doors.
softly outside.
He
as
was
we
27
continue.
years old.
At
A
approximately
man
8:30
currently
in the
existing
evening
in a
on
space
Thursday,
defined by
February
recent
26th,
2025.
according to records that would
Deputies
later
from
be
the Manatee
examined,
County Sheriff's
his
Office
ex-wife had
arrived
left
at a
the
home in the
apartment
gated
in December,
community
just
of the
a
Lake
month
Club
prior,
at Lakewood Ranch.
to
The
conduct
rooms he
a welfare
inhabited were
check,
likely filled with
responding
that
to the
specific
concern
kind of hollowness
that had been raised
that
by the
follows a
homeowner
departure.
who was traveling
There is a
abroad
unique
and
acoustics
had been
to an
unable to
apartment
reach his family
that has recently
and
lost
the deputies
half of its
who arrived at the
occupants.
property that evening
A silence
were
that
responding
amplifies
to what,
the hum of
from
the
refrigerator
outside and the
would have
settling
appeared
of the
to be a
building's
routine
foundation.
welfare check.
It was into
The
this
kind of
quiet
call that law
atmosphere
enforcement
that
agencies
Yasunia Norman
receive
arrived.
regularly.
Calls
She
from
stepped
family
out of the
members
vehicle
who cannot
and
reach
into the
someone they
crisp
care
January
about
air,
and who want to make sure
the interstate,
everything
the
is
I-10,
all right. Hummed in the distance,
and most of those calls
a constant
end
river
in the
of white
ordinary
noise
way,
that covers the valley
with
like
a knock on a
blanket.
door that is eventually
It is
answered.
a sound that residents of Tolson
or a
know
conversation with a
well.
neighbor
reminder
who
that the
explains
world is
that the
always
family went
moving,
out of town, even
or the
when you are
discovery of
standing
nothing
still.
more alarming than a phone
Yesenia
that was
walked
left on
toward the
silent.
unit,
And the
To any
deputies who
observer
went to
looking
the
out
house
a window,
in Lakewood Ranch
it was
that
simply
evening,
a meeting,
arrived
a
without
young
reason
woman
to
walking with
expect
the nervous
anything
energy
different.
of a first encounter.
And yet, as they approached
There
the
was no
property
sign of danger
and made
in
their
the
observations
architecture.
from outside,
The manicured bushes were still.
they saw or
The
perceived
pool water
something.
in the center of the complex
Something
was likely
about
glass
what they could
still
see
under
or
the
not
winter
see
stars.
from their position outside the
She
home.
reached the door.
That gave
She
them
stepped
reason
inside.
to believe that entering the
And then
property was
the
justified.
door closed.
And the Manatee County
that
Sheriff's
simple
Office
mechanical
has said
action,
publicly
the
that
latch
the
clicking
decision
into
to
place,
enter the property
the timeline
was
of the
based on
night
observations
split in
made
two.
from outside,
and
that
the
language,
traffic continued to flow
observations
toward
made
Phoenix.
from outside,
The automatic
is the
sprinklers
language
hissed
of law
to life
enforcement
on the lawns.
documentation.
The world remained loud
The careful
and busy.
language that describes
But inside
the
the
basis
apartment,
for a decision
a different
that the law
reality was
requires to
taking
have
shape.
a basis, hidden
And the
entirely
deputies
from
entered
view.
the home.
And what they
Apartment
found
walls
inside
are
that
thick
house
enough
in
to hold
Lakewood Ranch
secrets.
on that Thursday
And the
evening
complex
in February
stood quiet under the
was
winter
a scene that
stars.
Randy Warren of the
The
Manatee
neighbors,
County
settling
Sheriff's
into their
Office,
own
later
routines of
described
television and
publicly
sleep,
using the word
heard nothing that
violent.
would cause them to look up.
And I want to
The
stay
silence
with
of
that
the
word for a
desert
moment.
night had swallowed the moment.
Not to dwell on it it in
leaving
a
only
graphic
the
or
closed door
sensational
and the
way,
cooling air to mark
but to
the
honor
passage
the weight
of
of
time.
it. But long
Because
before
when a
the
law
silence
enforcement
settled over that
spokesperson
apartment
uses
complex,
the word violent
there
in
was
this
noise
context,
and color. They are
and the
acknowledging
vibrant
that
energy
what the
of a life
deputies
just
encountered when they
beginning.
entered that home was
To
not
understand
peaceful,
the weight of the
and was
quiet
not quiet
that followed,
and was not the
we
kind
must
of
first
scene
understand
that is
the
easy
voice
for anyone
that was
to
lost.
encounter. We
And
must
the
travel
deputies
back,
found a
away from the
14-year-old
shadows
boy
of
in
one
one
room
room
of the home, to meet the
deceased,
bright and hopeful
and
spirit
an 11-year-old
who stood
girl
at the very
in a separate
threshold
room of the home,
adulthood, deceased. And in
18
another room
is
of
an
the
age
home,
of open
they found the
doors,
children's mother,
where the world
a
feels
44-year-old
vast
woman
and waiting to be known.
also deceased. It is a
And the
time when the
scene was
boundaries of
secured,
childhood
and
have
the
dissolved,
investigation began,
but the heavy
and the
mantle of
notifications
adult
that follow a
responsibility
discovery of
has
this
not yet
magnitude
fully settled
were
on
set
the shoulders.
into motion.
For Yesenia
And
Norman,
among those notifications,
known affectionately
was
to
the
her
most
family and
devastating
friends
one
as
of all.
Cece, this
The
was
notification
the season
of becoming
that had to be made to
She
the
was
father
standing on the
who was
edge of the
still
rest
in
of her
South
life,
America, looking out at a
the man
horizon
who had
that
made the
seemed
call
to stretch
to request
endlessly
a welfare
before
check
her,
on his family,
filled with
from
promise
thousands
and
of
the
miles
sweet,
away,
dizzying
and
scent
who now
of
had to
freedom.
receive the answer to the
At
question
the time,
his call had asked.
Yesenia was residing in a
And there are
transitional
no
facility
words
that
contracted
adequately
with the
describe
Arizona
what that
Department
moment
of
must have
Child
been
Safety.
like. And I do
It is
not
easy
try
to
imagine
describe
such
it.
places
I
as
only
cold
acknowledge
or
it,
institutional, and I ask you
but
to
for
pause
those living
here for
within
just a
them
moment and sit
they are
with it,
simply places
because
of
it temporary
temporary
residence,
residence,
acknowledged, filled
the
with the
enormity
mundane
of what that
rhythms
man
of daily
received
existence.
across an ocean.
The hallways
in the
were
middle
likely
of the
alive
night,
with
or
the
the
sounding
morning of communal
or whatever
living.
hour it was.
The
when
faint
the
murmur
call
of a
came
television
through,
set
and the
drifting
rain
from a neighboring
falls
room,
softly outside as
the
we
squeak
stay in
of
that
rubber
moment.
soles on linoleum,
What we know
and the
of
quiet,
the final days
collective
and the
breathing
final
of
hours
young
of these
people
two
in
children,
transit between
the
two
14-year-old
stages of
boy
life,
and the 11-year-old girl,
from her window
is
she would have had a
necessarily
view of
limited,
the Arizona sky,
because the
which in
investigation
January
was still in
is
its
often
early
piercing
stages
at
at the
brilliant
time of
blue.
initial public reporting.
It was a place of
and because
temporary
the
roots,
details of the family's
a pause
private
in the
life
journey
have not
where
been
she could
made
gather
fully
herself
public
before stepping
and
fully
yet what
into
the
the
public
world.
record does give us,
Her relationship
is enough
with her
to
mother,
construct a sense
Jessica
of the
Nunez,
ordinary life
remained a
that
tether
these
to
children
her
were
history.
living. It
And
is
the
the
most
specific,
important thing in that
bittersweet
record
privilege of a
is the
parent
statement made
to
by
watch a
Randy
child
Warren
grow,
of the Manatee
to
County
witness the
Sheriff's
transformation from a
Office, who
dependent
said clearly
girl
and without
into a young
qualification
woman navigating
that there had
her
been
own
no
path.
prior incidents
Jessica
at the
saw
family's
Cece
address,
not just as a daughter,
no calls to
but
that
as a
home
beautiful
from law
and bright
enforcement.
soul,
No
unaware that
history
the
that would
world
have placed this
outside could
family
be
on
on
anything
anyone's
other
radar
than
as a
welcoming.
family in crisis.
And
Yesenia's
that
innocence
detail was her lens.
the absence of a prior record.
She moved through her days
both a
with the
comfort
natural
in the sense
curiosity
that it
of
tells
someone
us
who
these
believes
children
that people are
were not
generally
living in a
good,
household
and
with a
that the
visible
future
history
is
of
a friendly
violence
place
or instability.
and
She
a
was
source
looking
of
for
profound
connection,
sadness,
for that
in the
feeling
sense
of
that it
being
tells
known
us
and understood
that whatever
that
was
we
building
all
in their
crave
home was building
But in the
invisibly.
modern world, below the
The
surface
search for
of what
connection
neighbors
often
and
begins
schools
not
and
in the
community
physical
members
world,
could see,
with its clear dangers
and Warren also
instincts,
noted that the family
but
had
in the
moved
digital
to Lakewood
one.
Ranch from Missouri,
As the sun
approximately
dipped
below the
3 years
horizon,
before the events
painting
of
the
February
desert in shades
26th.
of violet and bruised
And 3
orange.
years is long enough to have
Yesenia
settled
turned
in.
to the glowing screen
Long enough
in
to
her
have
hand.
enrolled the children in
Trust
school
is
and
often
established
built on the
routines,
fragile
and
foundation
built some degree of
words
connection
typed
to
into
the
the silence
community.
of the night. And yet,
And
for
3
years
Cece,
in a new
the
place,
blue light
is
of her
also
phone
still a
became a
relatively
beacon.
recent relocation.
She was looking for a
and
friend,
relocation,
a partner,
even when it is
a
voluntary,
connection.
and even when it
She
is
did
to
not
a
know it
beautiful
yet,
and
but
well-resourced
the signal
community
she was sending out
carries
into
its
the
own
digital
stresses
void
and
was
its
about
own
to
losses.
be answered.
The
Setting
loss of
her
the
on a
familiar
path
that would lead
the
away
loss of
from
the
the
support
safety of her room
networks
that
and
take
into the
years
quiet
to build.
unknown.
In the
The
modern
loss of
age,
the neighbors,
the
and
search
the
for
community
companionship
members,
has
and
shifted
the
from the
extended
town
family
square
and the old
to
friends
the palm
who
of
know
a
you
hand in a way that people
It is
in
a
a new
quiet
place
process,
cannot yet know
performed
you,
in the solitude
and
of
it
a
is
bedroom,
worth sitting with
where
that.
faces are reduced to
With the
static
particular
images,
kind of
and lives
invisible
are summarized in a
that
few
a family
lines of text.
relocation can place on every
Yesenia,
member of a family.
This digital landscape
including the
was
children
where the path
who
began.
have to navigate
She
new
swiped
schools
through the
and
profiles,
new friendships,
each
and
one
new
a
rhythms,
potential future,
and including the
each
adults
one a question
who are
mark
doing the
waiting
work
to be
of
answered.
rebuilding a life.
The mechanics
in a
of
These applications are designed to feel like a game, And the children
But
of
the
this
stakes
family
are always real,
the 14-year-old
connection.
and the 11-year-old,
Among the sea
were
of
children
faces,
who had made that
one
transition,
profile eventually
who had
stood
moved
out.
from Missouri to Florida,
Randall
and who were
Santillan.
living their lives
He was
in Lakewood
27
Ranch.
years old,
And
nearly
whatever
a
those
decade her
lives
senior.
looked like in their day-to-day
To an
detail,
18-year-old,
in their
9 years
homework,
can feel
and
like
their
a
lifetime of
friendships,
experience,
and their morning
routines,
a promise of
and their
stability that
afternoons,
perhaps she was seeking during her
they
time
were lives
in the
that
transitional
belonged to real
facility,
children, who had
The
real
connection was made,
experiences and real
not with a
connections
handshake or a
and
shared
real
glance across a
futures.
crowded room,
And those lives,
but with a simple
and those
notification,
futures deserved to
a
continue.
small chime-like
And the
sound
rain falls
that broke the
softly
silence of her
outside
evening.
as we hold that.
We often forget how
The
much
investigation
weight we place
into the
on
deaths
these
of the
digital
14-year-old
interactions.
boy,
A message
the
appears,
11-year-old girl,
and suddenly
and their 44-year-old
the stranger
mother
on the other
was
side
led by the
feels
Manatee
familiar.
County Sheriff's Office.
The exchange
Which
of
is the
words
primary
creates
law
an
enforcement
illusion
agency
of intimacy.
for Manatee County, Florida.
You learn their favorite
a
color,
county of
their
approximately
taste in music,
400,000
the rhythm
residents,
of their days,
situated on the
but
Gulf
you do not
Coast,
know the
south
sound
of
of their
Tampa
voice
Bay.
or the intent
And the
behind
sheriff's
their
office
eyes.
is an agency of considerable
days,
size and
the
scope.
conversation flowed
Responsible
between
for
Cece
law
and Randall.
enforcement in
It
all
was a tether formed of
unincorporated
data,
areas of the county,
invisible yet
as
strong
well
enough
as
to pull her
contracted
toward a
services
decision.
for certain municipalities.
The date was set for
And
January
the deputies
15th.
who had entered the
It
home
was
on
a
the
Tuesday.
evening of February 26th,
The rhythm of the
immediately
week was ordinary.
recognized that this
The
was
city
a
of
scene
Phoenix
requiring
moving
the
through its
full
usual
engagement
motions of
of
traffic
the
and
agency's
commerce.
investigative resources.
But for Cece
and the
the day held a
MCSO's
different
Criminal
weight.
Investigations Division,
There is a specific
along
kind
with
of energy
forensic
that comes with
specialists
preparing
and the
to
Manatee
meet
County
someone
Medical
for the first
Examiner's
time.
Office.
The
Were
careful
called to the
selection
scene to begin
of
the
an
work
outfit,
that a
the
death
checking of the
investigation
mirror,
of this nature
the quiet
demands.
hope that the person
And
waiting
the work
on the
of
other
forensic
end
investigation
matches the image
at
in
a
your
scene
mind.
involving multiple
She told
deaths
friends she
is
was going to meet him.
extraordinarily thorough, and
It
was
was a statement of
extraordinarily
fact,
detailed, devoid
because
of
the
fear.
investigators must
In her mind,
reconstruct what
she was
happened
simply
in a
moving
space
from the
from
digital
physical
world evidence
to the
alone
physical one.
They must
Bridging the
determine
gap
the sequence
that had been
of
closed
events
by days of messaging.
the positioning of individuals.
The sun began to
the
dip
nature
below
and
the
cause
horizon,
of the injuries,
painting the
and
Arizona
the chain
sky
of
in
causation
bruised purples
that connects
and deep
each
oranges.
piece of evidence. The
The
air
air grew
overall
crisp,
picture of what
the
occurred.
desert shedding its heat
And they must
as
do
the night
all of
rolled
this
in.
with precision and
As
with
the sun set
documentation
on January 15th,
that will withstand legal
Yesenia
and
stepped out
scientific
into the
scrutiny.
cooling air,
And in
believing
this case,
she was heading
the
toward a new
preliminary
beginning.
investigation moved
The
relatively
destination
quickly
was
to
an
the
apartment
conclusion
complex in
that was
Tolleson,
communicated to the
a
public,
suburb that
by
sits
Randy
quietly
Warren
on
in
the
the
western
western
edge
edge
of the
following
Phoenix
the discovery
metropolitan area.
The conclusion
It is a
that
landscape
the mother
of
had been
beige
responsible
stucco
for the
and red
deaths of
tile
her children
roofs,
before taking
where one
her
building
own life.
looks much like the next,
And Warren was careful,
and the streets
and
are laid
deliberate
out
in
in
how
a
he
grid
communicated
that
this
offers
to the
little
public,
in the way of surprise.
acknowledging that the investigation
It is a place
was
where
ongoing,
people live their
and that
lives
the
in
official
close
causes
proximity,
of death had not yet
separated
been formally
only by
determined
thin
by the
layers
medical
of
examiner,
drywall and insulation,
but stating clearly that
Randall
law enforcement
Santillan,
was
a
confident
27-year-old
that all
man
parties
called
involved
this
in the
place
incident
home,
were accounted
but
for.
by mid-January,
That there was no further threat to the
significantly
community,
quieter than it had been
and
in
that
previous
no one else
months.
had entered or left the home
According to
during
records,
the relevant time period.
He had lived there with his wife
And he
until
used
December,
the words,
when she left the
unimaginable
residence, and tragic.
The space was now marked
And
by
those
a certain
words,
vacancy, spoken by a
the
law
kind of
enforcement
heavy
officer
emptiness that
who had been
settles
to the
into a
scene,
room,
and
when
who
a
had
life that
seen
was
what
once
the deputies
shared
had found
become singular.
when they entered that house.
Objects that once had a place
Carry a
were
weight
likely
that
gone,
official language does
leaving
not always
dust
carry.
outlines on the shelves,
And the Manatee
and
County
the air
Medical
inside was
Examiner's
still.
Office,
The
which is
complex itself
responsible
was
for
typical of
performing
the region.
autopsies and
At
formally
night,
determining
these places
cause
become
and manner of
labyrinths
death
of shadows
in all
and amber
cases of
security
sudden,
lights.
unexplained.
The corridors
or
are
violent
long
death
and
in Manatee
uniform,
County,
lined with
received
doors
the
that are
three
identical in
individuals
color and shape,
and began the process
distinguished
of
only by
examination
small brass
that would
numbers.
produce the official
It is the
forensic
architecture
record
of anonymity,
of how each person died.
Residents come and
And
go,
that process,
passing each
which
other
is
in the
thorough
parking
and
lot
which
or
takes
by the
time to
communal
complete,
mailboxes,
would eventually
often
produce
exchanging
the
nothing
formal
more than a
documentation
nod.
that becomes
you can
the
live in
permanent
such a place
legal
for
and
years
scientific record
and never
of the
truly
case.
know the person on
And
the
the other
other
side of the wall,
if there was a note.
you might hear the muffled
the
sound of a
communications
television
on the family's devices,
or the heavy tread of footsteps
and the evidence
on the ceiling,
gathered from throughout the home.
but the lives within
were all
remained
collected
sealed away
and
cataloged, private,
and would become
unknown.
part of the investigative
It was
file
here that the digital
MCSO
path
would
Yesenia
build,
had followed,
and the weeks following
finally
the discovery,
intersected with
and
the
physical
investigation
world.
into what had happened.
She arrived
in that
at the
house,
complex
and into
under
the
the
state of
cover of
mind
the January
of the woman at the
darkness.
center of it.
The
Would be
temperature
one of the
had
most
dropped,
painful
as
and
it
most
always
necessary
does in the
pieces
high
of
desert,
work that the
leaving a
agency's
chill in the
investigators
air
would
that
do,
prompts people to close
not
their
because
windows
there was
and
a
draw their
perpetrator to be
blinds
apprehended
tight
against the night,
because there was not.
she walked to the door
But
of
because
Santillan's
understanding
unit.
what happened is
There was no
something that the
commotion
victims
that drew
and
the
their
attention
families
of
and
their
neighbors.
community deserve. There was no shouting,
And
that
because
echoed
learning
through the
from
breezeways
tragedies is the only way,
there was
that
simply the
systems of
mundane
protection
sound of a
and
latch
intervention
clicking into place
that are supposed to
the door
prevent
closed
them can be improved.
sealing the interior
Under
from
Florida
the exterior
law,
world. A case in which the
apartment
investigation
walls are thick
determines
enough to
that a
hold
homicide
secrets,
has occurred and the complex
and that the
stood
individual
quiet
responsible
under the winter
for
stars.
that homicide is also deceased.
The night continued, follows a legal
traffic
and
on the I-10
administrative
freeway
pathway
hummed along
that
in a
is
steady,
distinct from
distant
the criminal
drone.
prosecution
But for
process.
Yesenia,
And this
time
is
had
worth
stopped.
explaining carefully. The sun rose
many
on January
people are not
16th,
familiar with it,
casting long
and
pale
understanding
shadows
it
across
is
the
part of
valley
understanding
how a
was a
story like
Tuesday,
this one, a day of
reaches
routine
its
for the
official
rest of the
conclusion.
world. And in
Commuters
Florida,
merged onto the
as in
freeway.
all-American
Coffee
states,
shops filled with
the
the
criminal
morning rush,
prosecution
and
requires
the
a
city
living
of Phoenix
defendant began its daily
someone
rhythm.
who can be charged,
But for
and
Jessica
who can appear
Nunez,
before a court,
the rhythm
and who
had
can be
broken.
tried,
And
the silence
if
from her
convicted,
daughter's phone
sentenced,
was not merely a lack
and
of
when the
noise,
person responsible for a
it was a
homicide
presence
has
in
died
itself,
before charges could be
growing
filed,
heavier with
whether
each
by their own
passing
hand,
hour.
as appears to be the case
Calls
here,
went
or
to
by other
voicemail.
means. Messages
The criminal
remained
justice
unread.
system
has no
the
one
digital
to prosecute.
tether that usually
And the
connected
case
mother
is
and
instead
daughter had
processed
gone slack.
entirely through the medical
January
examiner's
17th
system,
came
and the
and
law
went,
enforcement agencies
marking the passage of
internal
time
investigation
with a slow,
and the
agonizing
findings
precision.
of that investigation.
Then the
and the medical
18th followed,
examiner's autopsy
indistinguishable
results
from the day
become
before,
the official record
save
of what
for
occurred.
the deepening pit of dread
And in Florida,
that settles in the
the
stomach
medical
when a
examiner
loved one
system
vanishes.
is organized on a regional
It
basis.
is a specific kind of
with
pain,
medical examiners
the pain of
appointed
not
by the
knowing.
governor
It
serving
sits in the
specific
chest,
geographic
tight and cold,
districts,
refusing
and
to be
Manatee
ignored,
County falls
even
within
as the
Florida's
world
12th
outside
medical
continues
examiner
its
circuit.
indifferent march
And the
forward.
medical examiner for that circuit
By January
holds the
19th,
responsibility.
the waiting
of
had become
determining
impossible
cause
to
and
bear.
manner of death. The
In
decision was
cases of
made to
violent,
involve the authorities.
sudden, or unexplained
Entering
death,
a police station
and
to
the
file
manner
a
of
missing
death
person
determination
is a
which is
surreal,
distinct
from the cause of death determination. The environment is often
is the
clinical,
determination
filled
that
with
categorizes
the hum of
whether a
fluorescent
death
lights
was a homicide,
and the smell of stale
suicide,
coffee and floor wax,
an accident,
a
it is a
natural
place
death,
of procedure,
or undetermined,
where emotional chaos
and in a
meets the
case
rigid
like this
structure
one,
of bureaucracy.
the medical examiner's
An officer
determination
sat behind a
that
desk.
the children's deaths
The fabric
were
of his
homicides,
uniform rustling as he
caused by
adjusted
the
his
actions
posture.
of another person. He began the
And that
process
the mother's
of typing
death
was a suicide.
The sound of keys clacking
would
against
become
the board
part
was
of
rhythmic,
the permanent official
dry
record
mechanical
of the case.
staccato
that seemed too small
And
to
Florida
contain the magnitude of the situation. 782.04
Age,
which defines
known
murder in
location.
the first and second
Each
degree.
keystroke
in Florida
entered Yesenia's
and
life
Florida
into a database,
statute 800, transforming a vibrant 18-year-old girl into a
which
case
addresses
number, child
a
abuse,
file to be
and
managed,
aggravated child
a query
abuse.
to be run.
Define the
The gears
legal
of the
framework
system turned
within
slowly.
which harm to children
Databases
is
were checked,
categorized and
protocols
addressed by
were
the state
initiated.
of Florida. The questions
And
asked,
while
were
those
standard,
statutes
could not be
yet
applied,
each one
in the
felt like an
prosecution
intrusion
of
into
anyone
the
in this
privacy of a
particular
life
case.
now interrupted.
They represent the legal
Had she
and
run
moral
away before?
foundation of Florida's
Was there a
commitment
boyfriend?
to protecting children. The
And to
answers
treating
were recorded
violence against children
filtered through the
as
lens
among
of
the
law
most
serious
enforcement
offenses
and
under
added to the
state
growing
law.
digital pile.
And the child death review process.
Outside the station,
The sun
which
began to
exists
set
in
in Florida,
another day,
as in all 50
painting
states,
the sky
as
in
a
bruised
mechanism
shades
for
of purple and
multidisciplinary
orange.
examination
The busy world
of circumstances
moved
surrounding
unaware
child
that in a
deaths
quiet apartment in
would likely
Tucson,
be engaged
the
in this
answers
case.
lay waiting in the
Because
dark.
child death review teams,
We
are
leave pieces of
specifically
ourselves
designed
everywhere
to look
we
at the
go.
broader systemic questions
Echoes in the data that
surrounding
tell
a
the
child's
story
death when we cannot. To ask not just what happened,
It is a silent pulse,
but what could have been different.
the city streets.
What systems were in
Unseen
place
by the human
or not
eye,
in place, but recorded in
and
the
what
vast
lessons
memory
can be drawn
of the
to
network.
protect other
While
children
the physical
in the future,
world may go dark,
and the Florida
and the
child
street
abuse of
death
Tolleson
review may
Committee,
empty for the
which
night,
operates
under the Florida
the invisible
Department of
web
Health
of cellular
is the
signals
statewide body
continues to
responsible
hum,
for overseeing
capturing
this
the
process.
movements of a life
And
in
while the
transit.
findings of any such review
The
in this
investigation
specific
into
case
Yesenia's
would not
disappearance
necessarily
quickly
be made
turned
public
to this
in detail.
digital landscape.
The existence of that
Detectives
process
began the slow,
reflects
methodical
a serious
work of pulling
and sustained
records,
commitment,
looking for the
to
ghost
learning
in the
from
machine.
the tragedies that should
It is a
never
process
have
of
happened.
triangulation.
The news of what
A
had been found in
mathematical
the
way
house
of
in the Lake
understanding
Club
how
at
a
Lakewood
small
Ranch
device in a
spread
pocket
through the
reaches out
community
to a steel
and then
tower
through local
miles
and
away.
national media in the
It is a
hours and
constant,
days following
silent
the discovery
conversation,
on February
a digital
26th,
handshake where the phone
and the
whispers,
response at
"I am
every
here,"
level reflected
and
the
the tower
particular
replies,
kind of shock,
noting
the
the times
times
when
when
a
a
tragedy
tragedy
of
of this
absolute
nature
precision
occurs in a place
According
that
to
has
the
been
electronic
defined
trail,
by its safety,
the silence
and its
of January
orderliness
15th
and its
was
deliberate
not truly
cultivation
empty.
of the
The
kind
data
of
streams
environment
began to paint
that
a picture
families
that
choose
witnesses
specifically
could not,
because it feels
like
protected.
two streams merging
And the
into
Lake
a
Club
single
at
river.
Lakewood Ranch
The
is
digital
exactly
footprints
that
of
kind of
Yesenia
place.
Norman and Randall
A gated
Santillan
community
were found to
within a
converge.
master-planned community.
The invisible map
a
was being
neighborhood
drawn,
that represents
line
a
by
particular
line,
vision
connecting
of
the
residential
dots in the
safety
quiet dark
and beauty
of the Tolleson apartment complex.
And when something like this happens
the
in a
signals
place like
place
that,
them together.
it
side
confronts
by
people
side
very
in the digital
directly with the
void,
truth that no
confirming
gate
that
and
the
no
meeting had
carefully
taken
maintained
place
landscape
just as the
and
sun
no
had
community
set over
plan
the valley
can fully protect
But
a
the map
household
did not stop
from what
at
is
the
happening
apartment complex.
inside it. Modern
And that
vehicles,
is a difficult
much
truth.
like phones,
And it
have
is
their
a
own
truth
stories
that
to
ripple
tell
through the community,
their
of
own
Lakewood
memories
Ranch,
stored in the
circuits
hours
of their
and days
dashboards.
after the news became known.
The
investigation would later
and the
reveal
Community
the movement
Association
of
for the
Santillan's
Lake
vehicle
Club
released a statement
metallic ghost
that was
gliding
both
through the
careful
grid of
and
the city.
heartfelt. It left a wake of
Acknowledging
data
that they were
points,
aware of the tragic
timestamps,
incident,
and that the matter
location
remained
pings
under active
that tracked its
investigation
journey through the
by
cool
the Manatee
night
County
air.
Sheriff's Office. There's a certain
expressing
comfort
that
in
their
the
hearts
precision of
were
this
with the
technology.
family.
And with all
It
those
ensures
affected,
that even in the
and
vastness
asking for
of the
respect
Arizona
for the
desert,
privacy of those
where the
involved,
horizon seems to swallow
and that
secrets,
statement, nothing
with its measured
is truly
language
lost.
and its evident genuine grief,
The detectives
reflects
worked with
the
the quiet
posture of a
confidence of
community
those who
that
know
has
that
been
math
touched by
does not
something
forget,
it
does not know how to hold.
They were building a timeline,
and local
minute
media
by
outlets,
minute,
including Fox
reconstructing
13
the evening
and
with a
WFLA
clarity that
news
memory
channel
alone
8
could never
reported on the
provide.
story from the beginning. The puzzle was
Covering
being
the
assembled,
press conference
piece
held
by
by
Randy
piece,
Warren,
bringing
and the preliminary
order to the
statements
chaos
of
of
the
the unknown.
MCSO. The digital
national
ghost
media
had told its
including
story.
People magazine carried
The signals
story
had been
to
traced,
a wider audience.
The handshakes verified,
and the questions that the
and the
coverage
timeline
generated.
established on glowing
The
screens,
questions about what
in
had happened
cool,
and why and whether it could have been
rooms.
prevented.
The technology
and what
had done
warning
its job,
signs might have existed,
pointing the way like a compass
were the
in a
questions
storm.
of a public trying to
But
understand
while the data was
something
being
that
compiled,
resists
a
understanding.
physical discovery was
And the
about to be
community
made
of Lakewood
that
Ranch,
would bring the search to
which
its
had never had
heartbreaking
cause to see
conclusion.
itself as a place touched
On January
by this kind of
28th,
tragedy.
the abstract
was
lines
left
of
a
the
process
digital
of
map
grief
finally
that was
converged
both
on
communal
a physical door
and deeply private.
It was a Wednesday.
The grief of neighbors
Nearly 2
who had
weeks
not known
since
the family
Yesenia
well
had
enough
last been seen
to
walking out
anticipate
into
what
the
happened,
winter evening, but who now had to live with the
apartment
knowledge of what had
complex in
happened.
Tolleson stood
in a
quiet
house on
under the
their
midday
street.
sun.
The story of what
collection of
happened in
stucco
Lakewood
walls
Ranch
and
on the
numbered
26th
doors
of February
that looked like any
asks
other
us
in
as
the
the
sprawling
stories
valley.
of children who have been harmed.
Neighbors
Always
went
ask
about
us
their routines,
to think carefully,
walking
and
dogs
honestly
and collecting
about the
mail,
systems and the relationships,
unaware that the
and
silence
the community
behind one
practices
specific door
that are
was
supposed
about
to
to
protect
broken.
children. The
and
investigation
about what any
had
of us
moved
can
from
do
the cool,
when we are concerned
detached
about
world
the well-being
of data
of a
analysis
child or of a
to the
family
warm
in our lives.
dusty reality.
And I want
of
to
the
spend
Arizona
some time
suburbs.
with this.
Officers
Because it is
arrived
not
at the
just a
complex,
closing
not with
section of a
sirens
story,
wailing, but
it
with
is
the
one of the
grim
most
determination
important things
that
we
often
can carry
accompanies
with
a
us
search
when
warrant
we leave a
served
story like
after
this
too
one.
many days of silence.
And the first thing to understand
the air was
is
still.
that mental health crises
The
and
traffic
parents,
from the nearby freeway
crises
was just
that can
a distant
escalate to the
hum.
point of harm.
A reminder
to
of the
children
world continuing
are
to
very
turn,
often
while
invisible
time
to the
inside the
people
apartment
outside the
had stopped.
household. world.
When
They
the
do not
authorities
always
entered
announce
the residence
themselves through
they
dramatic
were met with a
behavioral
heavy
changes
stillness.
or public incidents.
There was no
or
movement
calls to law
inside.
enforcement, no sound of a
They can
television
build quietly
or the hum
inside
of daily
a
life.
person.
Driven
The
by
apartment,
grief or by
once
financial
shared by
stress
Randall
or by the
Santillan and
particular
his wife
pressures
before
of
her departure in
relocation
December,
and isolation,
now held
and
only
the
the
loss
echoes
of
of
support
the past.
networks.
It was a space
And they can
defined
build
by
to
what
a point of
and
crisis
who was
without the
missing.
people closest
But
to
as
that
they
person
moved further into
ever
the
fully
residence,
seeing what is
the
happening,
hope that had
and this
sustained the search for
invisibility
13
is one of the
days
most
began to
challenging
fade,
aspects of preventing
replaced by a
tragedies
somber
like this
realization.
one. Because
The
it
scene
means
they
that
found
the conventional
told a
signals
story of
that we
tragedy.
train ourselves to look for
Yesenia
are
was
not
found
always
within
present
the apartment,
and it means
her life
that the
ended by
systems
violence.
that exist to intervene,
There is no need
must
to
be
dwell
both
on the
more
specifics of the
proactive
trauma.
and more sensitive.
The heartbreak
than they
is heavy
sometimes
enough
have
on
the
its own.
capacity to be.
It was a senseless
And in
act,
Florida, as in
a
all
sudden
states,
and permanent end to
the
a
child
life
welfare
that was just
system
beginning
includes
to
the
bloom.
Department of Children and Families,
18
known
years
as
of
DCF,
dreams,
of struggles,
which is responsible
growth,
for receiving
had come
and
to
investigating
arrest
reports
in the
of
quiet
child
of that
abuse,
room,
neglect, and
the
endangerment.
investigation confirmed
and the Florida
that she had
abuse
likely been
hotline,
there since the
which
night
is the
she
official
disappeared,
reporting mechanism
hidden
for
away
child
while
welfare
the world
concerns
outside
in the state of
searched
Florida
and prayed.
can be reached
The
at
apartment offered no other answers.
1-800-962-2873.
Randall Santillan was not
and
there.
it is available 24
The
hours
space
a day,
felt abandoned,
7 days a week,
as if the person who
and
lived there
calls
had
are
simply
confidential.
evaporated,
and
leaving
anyone who
behind
suspects
only the
that a
terrible
child is
evidence
being
of his
abused
actions
or neglected,
or is
for the
in
officers
danger,
standing
has
in that
both the
room,
legal right,
the
and,
procedural
in
work
Florida,
of a missing persons
in many
case
circumstances,
shifted instantly
the legal
to the weight of a
responsibility
homicide
to make that
investigation.
call.
And the
The
child
waiting
help
was over,
National Child Abuse
replaced
Hotline,
by a grief that was
which is
absolute.
available nationwide.
But
But
the
the man who held the
1-800
answers was no longer in Arizona.
453
He was running. Is another resource
Randall
that is
Santillan
always
was
available,
already miles away,
always free, a solitary
always
figure
confidential,
moving through the
and
vastness
staffed
of the
by
American
trained
Southwest,
counselors
who can help callers
The
understand
interstate is
their
a river of
options
concrete
and take
that
the
does
right
not
next
ask
questions of those who travel
and for
it.
adults who are
And
themselves
for a man
in
looking to
crisis.
disappear, for parents
The
who are
road
struggling with
offers
mental
a
health
seductive
challenges
kind of
or with the weight of
anonymity.
pressures
He
that
was
feel
just another set of
insurmountable.
headlights cutting through the dark.
The 988
Another
suicide
traveler
and
in a
crisis
sedan
lifeline
moving from one
is
point on the
available
map
by
to
calling
another.
or texting 988
But the map was
from
changing
anywhere
with
in
every
the
hour
United
that
States.
passed.
And it is
The
there
geography
not just
shifting
for people
outside
who are
his window
thinking about
as he put
ending their own
distance
lives
between himself and
but
the
for
silence
anyone
he
who
had
is in
left
emotional
behind in
distress
Tolleson.
and who needs support.
He drove east,
leaving
and
the
the familiar
crisis
grid
text
of the
line,
Phoenix Valley for the open,
available
high
by
deserts of New
texting
Mexico.
home to 741
The landscape here is ancient and imposing,
defined by
offers
mesas
another way
that
to
rise
reach
like
trained
altars
counselors
against the
without
horizon
having to make a
and
voice
earth
call.
that is stained.
And these
the color
resources
of rust.
exist because the
During
people
the day,
who built them
the sun
understood
bleaches
that
the color
crises
out of
do
the
not
world,
always announce
but
themselves
at night,
loudly.
the shadows
That
stretch
sometimes
long
the person
and
who
deep,
is struggling most
hiding the
is
scrub
the person who
brush
looks
and the dry
from
creek
the
beds.
outside.
The air
Like
is
they are
thin and
managing,
sharp,
and if you
and
are
the sound
someone
of the
who
wind
is struggling
buffeting
right
the car
now,
frame is a
or if you
constant
know someone
low
who is
roar,
I want
for
to say
hundreds
clearly
of miles
and without
there's
reservation
nothing but the rhythmic
that reaching
thump
out
of tires
is the
on
right
asphalt
thing to do,
and the pale glow
It is not
of
a
the
sign of
dashboard.
weakness.
A small
It is
island
not a
of
thing
light
to be
in a
ashamed
sea
of.
of darkness. It is the act
As he crossed
of
into
a person
Texas,
who is taking
the world
seriously
flattened out.
the responsibility
The dramatic
they carry
cliffs
for
and
themselves,
canyons smoothed
and for
into
the
people
endless
who depend
plains
on
of the
them.
West, where the
The two
sky
children
feels
who were
larger
found
than
in
the
that
land
house
itself.
in Lakewood Ranch on the evening
It
of
is a
February
hypnotic stretch
26th,
of country,
2025,
where the white lines on the
have
road
not been
pass
publicly
with the
named,
regularity of a
and
metronome.
in many ways, that
Counting
absence
down
of a
the
public
seconds
name
of a flight
makes this
that had
particular
no clear
act of
destination.
remembrance more
Oil
challenging.
rigs nodded
because
slowly in the
names give us
distance
something
like
to hold on
giant
to.
metallic birds feeding
Names
on the
are how
earth.
we reach toward the
And the
specific
occasional
and
cluster of
irreplaceable
lights
humanity
from a
of a
passing
person
town would
and
flare
yet
up,
the absence
and
of
then
their
fade
names
into the
does not
rearview
diminish
mirror,
the reality of
instantly
who they were,
relegated to the past,
does not reduce the fullness of the
the
lives
rearview
they
mirror
were living
is the
and
fugitive's
futures
constant
they
companion.
deserved.
It is
And
a
a
small
14-year-old
rectangle
boy
of glass
is
that
not
holds
an
the fear
abstraction.
of what is following.
He is a person,
But
with
for
a
mile
face
after
and
mile,
a voice,
it showed
and a
only
sense
the
of
empty
humor
road
and a set
and the
of
receding
things
night.
he cared about deeply.
He slept
and
in
a
the
group
car,
of people who knew
likely
him
pulling
and who
over
have
at
been
rest
changed
stops
forever
the hum of idling semi-trucks, provided
and an
a cover of
11-year-old girl
noise.
is not an abstraction.
The isolation of a vehicle
She is a person
on a
with a
cross-country
name
trip
that her
is
family
profound.
knows, and that her
It is a
friends
capsule
know,
of
and that
stale
her teachers
air
know.
and static radio stations.
A person whose absence
A
is
suspended
felt
state
in
of
specific
existence
and
where the normal
irreplaceable
rules
ways
of time seem
by
to
every
bend.
person
From the dry,
who is a
flat
part of her
expanse
life.
of Texas,
And
the
both
route
of these
turned
children
north and
deserved
east,
to grow up,
winding toward Missouri,
deserved to move through the years
the vegetation
that were
began
waiting
to
for them.
change.
The
The
scrub
years
brush
of high
replaced
school
by the
and
skeletal
friendships
shapes
and
of winter
first
trees,
jobs,
and
their
all
bare
of the
branches
ordinary
reaching
and
up like
extraordinary
cracks in the gray
experiences that make up a life.
The air grew heavier
and
here,
they were taken from those
holding
years
the moisture
in a
of the
house
rivers
that
that
should have been the
carved through the
safest
Midwest.
place in the world for them.
The dryness of the
And
desert
that
was
fact
gone,
is one that sits
replaced
very
by a
heavily
damp
in the
chill
chest
that settles into
and
the
does not
bones.
move easily.
He
And
was
the
moving
reflection
through the
that their
heartland
story
of the country,
invites is
passing
one that
through
asks
landscapes
us to
that
commit
looked identical
in whatever
in their
way we
winter
can
dormancy,
to being
brown
the kind of
fields,
people who
gray
take seriously
skies,
the
and
well-being
endless
of the
gray
children
ribbon
in our
of the
lives,
highway,
and the well-being of the
but the
adults
journey did not
who are
end
responsible
in the
for those
Midwest.
children.
The
To
car
being the
turned
kind of
south
people
again,
who notice, and
drawn
who ask,
toward the
and who
humidity
act,
and the warmth
to
of
being
the
the
Gulf
kind of
Coast.
people who trust
Crossing into
the
Mississippi,
instinct that something
the
might
atmosphere
be
shifted
wrong
once more.
even when there is no proof.
The air became
and no
thick and
prior
palpable,
history, and no
carrying the
obvious
scent
sign.
of pine needles and damp earth.
Because the most devastating
the landscape
characteristic
closed
of
in
a case like this one,
the wide horizons
is the
of the West
absence
replaced
of
by
visible
dense
warning.
forests and bayous,
And the
where
most
water
important
sits
thing
still
we can
and
carry
black
out
under
of
the
a story
trees.
like this one
It is a place
the
where the
willingness
geography
to be more
feels
attentive
heavy,
than visibility
where the Spanish
alone
moss
demands.
hangs from the oaks
And
like
the community
old lace
of Lakewood Ranch,
and the sound of the
which
tires
is a community
changed
of
from a dry
thousands
hum
of families
to a wet
living in
hiss on the
proximity
pavement.
to one another.
He drove through the changing
shared
geography
streets
of
and
America,
parks
putting
and lakes
miles between
and schools
himself
and
and
the
all
truth.
of the daily
But he
infrastructure
could not
of a
outrun
shared
the
neighborhood.
Is a
The
community
digital
that has been
footprint he had
asked
created
by this
was
tragedy
traveling with him,
to look more closely
bouncing
at
from
itself
tower to
and
tower,
at the families
an
within it,
invisible tether
to ask
connecting
whether
him
there are
back
people
to the
who are
apartment
struggling
in Tolleson
and who have not yet
He
found
believed he
the
was
courage
vanishing
or
into
the
the deep
words
south,
or the opportunity
losing
to
himself
say
in the
so.
humidity
And
the
that
slow
question
pace of the coast
is not a comfortable one.
But the map was
It is not
already
an easy
closing
one.
in, and it is
The
also
road
eventually
not an
runs
optional
out.
one.
For Randall
Because the answer
Santillan,
to that question,
it ended near the ocean.
the act of looking
The air
and
in Biloxi
noticing
sits
and
heavy
reaching
on the
out
skin,
is
a
the
humid
thing that
embrace
makes
that carries
communities
the scent
more
of
than
salt
just
collections
water
of
and
old
houses.
pine.
It is
Distinct
the
from
thing
the
that
dry,
makes
crisp
them
heat of
actual
the Arizona
communities.
desert.
Actual
On
places
the morning of
where
February
people are
6th,
responsible for
the
one
sun
another,
rose over the
and the
Mississippi
two
Sound,
children who were found in that
casting a
house
pale,
in February
golden light
deserve to
across the
live
water.
in that kind of community.
It was 7 o'clock in the morning,
Deserve to be surrounded
a time
by
when
that
the
kind of
coastal city was
attentiveness.
just beginning to stir,
And the adults in
with
their
fishing
lives
boats
and in
heading
their
out into
neighborhood
the Gulf,
deserve
and the
to
early
have the
traffic
resources
moving slowly
and the
along the
connections
beachfront.
and the
For
support
Randall
systems
Santillan,
that make that
the long
attentiveness
drive had
possible.
reached its terminus,
And we carry
he
their
was
story
located by
forward
authorities
tonight,
not in a moment
not
of high
as a
drama,
piece of news
but
that
with
will
the
be
quiet
forgotten
efficiency
in the morning
of a
news
system
cycle,
that never sleeps.
but as a reminder,
The digital
as a weight
signals
that
had
we
done their
choose to
work,
carry,
guiding
because
law
choosing to
enforcement to
carry
his
it
location
is how
near
we
the
honor
water's
the
edge.
lives of people who are
There
gone.
was no chase,
And so we arrived.
there was no desperate final
gently
stand.
and slowly. At the
The
end
net
of tonight's
simply
story.
closed. And I want
At
you to
7
let
in the
your
morning,
breathing
under the
slow
soft light
now,
of the Mississippi sun,
to let the weight
running
of what we have
came to an
moved
end.
through together
begin
the
to
arrest
find
was
its
described
place
as
in you.
calm and procedural,
not the place of
a stark
active
contrast
grief,
to the violence
but the
that had
place of
precipitated
quiet
his
remembrance.
Officers
The place where
approached.
things that
The
matter
necessary
are held
words were
even
spoken,
when we are sleeping,
and the handcuffs were applied.
even when we are resting.
It was the mechanical
Even when the
restoration
conscious
of
mind
order.
has released its grip
The
on
chaotic
events
energy
of
of
the
the
day,
fugitive was
and the
replaced
rain
by the
outside
stillness of
continues to
custody.
fall,
He was
as it has been
transported to
falling
the
all
Harrison
through this
County
story,
Adult Detention Center,
steady and soft,
a facility of
and without any
concrete and
demand.
steel that stands in sharp
Just the
opposition
sound of water
to
and
the
the
open
darkness
horizon
and
of
the
the
stillness
stillness that belonged to the late
There,
hours of
the
the
reality
night.
of his actions in
And I
Arizona
want you to
finally
let
caught
that
up with him.
sound
Be with you now.
The charges were read into
to
the
let
record.
it carry you slowly
First-degree murder
away from the
and
weight of
kidnapping.
the world.
The legal
And
machinery
into the
began to
quiet
turn,
of your own rest.
processing the man who had
Because you
tried to
deserve that
disappear
rest.
into the geography
You have
of the
been
South.
present tonight
for a
The
story
miles he had
that
put
asks
between himself
something
and
of
the
you.
apartment in Tulsa
And the
were
act of being
effectively
present
erased
for these stories.
The extradition
The
process
act of sitting
would
with the
soon
difficult
begin,
things,
a slow
and not
and
looking
legal
away from
reversal
them,
of his flight,
and letting them inform
ensuring
the way you
that he
live
would
and the way
return
you
to the
love,
place where the silence
and the way you
began.
pay attention.
He had driven through New
Is
Mexico,
not a small thing.
Texas, and Missouri.
It is an act of witness,
seeking distance,
and witness is
but
one
the
of
law
the most important
recognizes
things
no such
we can offer
boundaries.
to the people
With
whose
Santillan in a
stories we
cell in
carry.
Harrison County,
And the two children
the immediate
who were
questions
found in
of
that house
where
in
and
Lakewood
who
Ranch,
were
Florida,
answered.
on the 26th
The
of
manhunt
February,
was over.
2025.
The map was folded.
Are people whose story
But while
has
the
been
suspect
witnessed
was secured,
tonight,
the emotional
and their
toll
memory
of the
is
events
held
remained.
with all the care,
Justice
and all
had
the
caught up.
dignity, and all
But for
the
those
respect
left behind,
that their lives
the
deserve.
journey of healing was just beginning.
And I will be here again tomorrow night.
For a mother,
And the
the
night
closing
after
of
that,
handcuffs does not
and
close
the rain
wound.
will stay with us through all
The
of
legal
it.
resolution provides
And
an
tonight
answer
I
to the
ask only
questions
that
of
you
who
sleep
and
well,
where. But it
that you
rarely
rest
satisfies
deeply
the
and
agonizing
peacefully,
question of why.
that you let your body and
Jessica
your mind
Nunez
have the
was left
restoration
to grapple
they need,
with the reality that
and that
defied
tomorrow you wake
understanding.
ready to be the
A
person
sudden
that the
silence
children in
where
your
there
life
used to be
need
a
you to
voice.
be.
In a
Sleep well
statement that
tonight.
captured the raw disbelief
The
of
rain
a
is
parent
still here,
facing
and
the
I will see you
unthinkable,
again tomorrow.
she said simply. The
I
community
can't
of Lakewood
imagine.
Ranch
I just
sits
can't
in
imagine
Manatee County in the
who
western
would do
part
that
of
to
the
her.
state of Florida.
And
It is
it
a
is the
question
kind
that
of place
echoes in
that,
the empty
if you were to
spaces left
describe it to
behind.
someone who had never
A
been
plea
there,
for reason in a
you would reach
situation
almost
where reason
immediately
had long
for
since
words
fled.
like peaceful and planned.
The community,
and quietly
however,
beautiful, sought to fill those
because
empty
Lakewood
spaces
Ranch
with
is
support.
one of the largest and most
In the days
deliberately
following the
designed
discovery
master
and
planned
Tulsa,
communities,
friends
in the
and
entire
strangers
United
alike
States,
gathered in the digital space.
a community
to offer
that was
comfort.
built not just as a collection
Catherine
of houses
Gassaway,
and streets,
who organized
but
the
as an
effort
integrated
to help the family
vision
with the
of
burden
what
of a
residential
burial,
life could look
described
like,
the loss
when
with
every
profound
detail is
sadness.
attended to with care and
She wrote of
intentionality.
Yesenia, known
And the roads
affectionately
that
to her
wind
loved
through
Lakewood
ones as
Ranch
Cece
are lined with
as a
mature
beautiful
trees
and bright
and carefully
18-year-old.
maintained landscaping.
These words
And the
serve as a
neighborhoods
necessary
within it
counterweight
are organized
to the darkness
around
of
lakes
the
and
investigation
parks
and nature
They remind us
preserves
that
and walking
before she was a
trails.
case file number,
And the community has
and
its
before
own
she was a
schools
headline
and its
on the
own
evening
shopping
news,
districts
and its own
she
medical
was a daughter
facilities,
standing on the threshold.
and it is the kind of place where
adulthood.
families come with the
We
intention
remember
of
Cece
staying,
not for how she left
with
this
the
world,
intention of building something,
but for the light she brought into
of putting
it.
down roots in the
18
warm
is an
Florida
age of
soil,
open doors,
and watching their children
plans
grow
made
up
for the
in a
future,
place that feels
and of
safe,
simple,
and
quiet
beautiful,
moments
and full
that
of
make up a life.
possibility. And
It is the
Manatee
laughter
County
shared with
itself
friends,
is a county of
the
enormous
messages
natural
sent late
wealth,
at night,
situated
and the
on the
dreams
Gulf
of what
Coast
comes
of
next.
Florida, just south of Tampa
The tragedy
Bay.
of Tolleson,
A county
is
of
now a
beaches
matter
and
of
waterways
public
and
record,
wetlands, filed
and the
away
kind
in
of
the
slow,
archives
golden
of the court
light
system
that the Florida Gulf Coast
But the memory of the
carries in
girl
late
remains
afternoon,
distinct
when the sun is
separate
dropping
from the
toward
crime,
the water,
preserved
and
in the
everything
hearts
it
of those who
touches
knew
turns
her. Amber
The
and
investigation
warm,
that
in the
began with a
town
missing
of
person
Lakewood
report
Ranch, and
which is
spanned across
technically
the
an
changing
unincorporated
landscapes of the
community
American
in the
South,
county,
has reached
rather
its
than a
conclusion.
municipality with its own government.
The data has been analyzed,
has grown
the signals
significantly
have been
over the
traced,
past 2 decades,
and the map has been drawn
as
to its
Florida's
end.
population has expanded.
And so,
and
the
as
case
more
is
and more
closed,
families
the
have
files
sought
are put
out
away,
exactly the kind
and the
of
night returns
intentional,
to its quiet
well-resourced living
The
environment.
map is folded
that Lakewood Ranch
The road
offers.
is empty,
and
you
within
are safe
Lakewood
where you
Ranch,
are.
there are several
The desert
distinct
wind
neighborhoods
blows through the
and
canyons of
communities,
Arizona,
each
moving
with
through
its
the
own
saguaros
character
and across
and its
the
own
long,
amenities,
straight highways.
and one of those
Carrying with
communities
it is
the
the
heat
Lake
of the
Club,
day.
which is a gated
The silence of the
residential
desert
development
is not
within
empty.
Lakewood Ranch.
It is peaceful.
That offers homes of a
It
certain
is a
scale
stillness
that
and a
covers the
certain
land,
finish,
settling
kind
over
of
the
neighborhood
neighborhood
where
where
the
the
Tolleson
driveways are
and
long,
the distant lights of
and the
Phoenix,
lots are generous.
Randall Santillan
and
is
the
behind
community
bars,
clubhouse
and the
offers
threat
the
has
kind
been
of
removed
amenities
from the night
that make a neighborhood feel like a
Yesenia is at
destination
rest,
rather than just a
her
place
memory
to
held
sleep.
safe by those
And
who
it was
loved her.
within the Lake Club that
The story has
family
been
at the
told,
center of tonight's story
and the burden
had
of
made
knowing
their home
is lifted.
A family that had
Now,
relocated
there is
from
only
the
the
state
sound
of
of the
Missouri
wind
approximately
and the steady
3
rhythm
years
of your
before
own
the
breathing.
events of February 26th.
Let the silence of the desert
A
carry
family
you
that had
into a
come to
deep
this carefully
and peaceful
curated isolated corner of Florida's Gulf Coast.
Good night.
And settled into a
Hello,
home
everyone,
there.
and welcome back.
And the neighbors
I know
around
many
them,
of you are here to
and the
find a moment
community
of
that
peace.
surrounded them. to let the day
and the
drift
streets
away
that they walked,
as you fall asleep,
and the lakes that they could see
So
from
get
their
comfortable.
windows.
Adjust your pillows
Were the backdrop
and let
of
the
the
ordinary
of the
daily
room
life
wrap
of
around
two
you.
children who
We
deserved
tell these
every
stories
ordinary
to remember
day
the
they
names
had,
of those lost,
and every ordinary
and to find
day that
order
was still
in the
waiting
chaos.
for them. Tonight,
and I
we
want
travel
you
to
to
the
hold
vast
that image,
open skies of Arizona.
the image of
Before
its
we
community
begin,
and this street,
I want to
and
acknowledge
this home,
that this story
as it was
involves
before
real
the
people
evening of February
and real
26th,
tragedies. Before the
We tell these
deputies
stories
arrived,
not for
and
entertainment,
before the world outside
but to remember the
learned
victims
what had happened
and the
inside.
lives they lived.
Because that image
So
of
please,
ordinariness,
close your eyes,
of the quiet,
lower
and
the volume
landscaping,
until my voice
and the
is
carefully
just a murmur
tended
in the
lives
background.
of a neighborhood that had
If you
never
are
had a
joining us
reason
for
to
a
draw
pain
law
enforcement
enforcement
nap,
attention, or simply
is the
trying to
image
quiet
that
the
makes
racing
the
contrast of what happened
Let
on
this
that
story
Thursday
be the anchor
evening
that holds
so
you
complete and so
I
devastating.
wonder what time it is where you
and the
are
rain
right now.
outside falls softly.
The night
as
is
we
long,
stay with that image
but we are
for a
awake
moment
together.
before we move forward. Trust is
The
a
two
fragile
children
thing
who
were found in that house
It is
on
built
the evening
slowly,
of February
brick by
26th,
brick,
but
have
it can
not
be
been
dismantled
publicly
in the
named
span of a
at the
single
time of
evening.
this recording.
It is
And
a
this is
landscape
something
of
that
straight
deserves
lines,
acknowledgement
and long
and
horizons,
respect.
where
Because
the
the decision
decision
of
of law
Phoenix
enforcement
bleeds slowly
agencies
into
and
the
families
shadow of the
to
mountains.
withhold the names of
Yesenia
child
Norman
victims
was
from the
18
public
years
record
old,
is a
standing
decision
on the
that is
threshold
made in
of a
service
life
of
that was
privacy
just
and
beginning to
dignity.
take shape.
And it is a decision that we
18
honor here
is an
by
age of
referring
open
to
doors.
these children.
It is
not
a
by
time when the
names
world feels
we do not
vast
have the
and
right
waiting to be
use,
known,
but by the truth of
For
who they
Yesenia,
were, who was known
and the truth of
affectionately
who
as
they
Cece,
were
is this. This age marked
There was a
transition
14-year-old
not
boy,
just in numbers, and there was an
but in
11-year-old
geography.
girl. She was
And
living
they
in
were
a facility
siblings.
contracted with the
And they were
Arizona
living their
Department of
lives
Child
in
Safety,
a house
in Lakewood
a place
Ranch,
that served as a
Florida,
bridge between
on a
childhood
street in a
and
neighborhood
the independence
where the
of
lawns were
adulthood.
green and the lakes were still.
The facility was
and
not
the
a
ordinary
cold
rhythms of
institution,
daily life moved
but a
along their
place of
familiar
temporary
tracks.
residence.
And 14 years
The hallways
old is
echoed
an
with the
age
sounds
that
of
carries its
communal
own
living,
particular weight,
the
and
murmur
its
of
own
televisions
particular
in the
kind of
evening,
presence, and the quiet shuffle
14
of footsteps
is an age
on
when
tile.
a young person is
From her
beginning
window
to move toward the
Cece
self
could
they
see
are
the
going to
Arizona
be.
sky. When
A
the
canvas
interests
that
that
shifted
shifted from the brutal white
passions
of
that will
noon
define
to the
them
bruised
are starting to
purple of
solidify
dusk into something recognizable.
She was a beautiful and bright
when
young
they are
woman,
old enough to
according
have
to those
opinions
who knew
and
her,
preferences and
holding
a sense
on
of
to
the
the
world
promise of what
that is
came
distinctly
next.
their own, and young
Her
enough
relationship
that everything
with her mother,
is still in the
Jessica
process
Nunez,
of becoming, was the bond of a
and
parent
11
watching
years
a
old
child grow
is
up.
an age that
A mix
still
of
belongs
belongs
entirely
entirely
to
quiet,
childhood,
persistent worry
in the best
that never
and
truly
the most
fades.
protected sense.
But the night has a way of changing
11
the
is
landscape.
the age of imagination.
If you were to stand
and
in
of
a
the close
parking lot in
friendships that feel
Tolleson,
like the whole
Arizona,
world,
at 2 a.m,
of the passions
the
that have not
world
yet
would
been
feel
touched by
entirely
self-consciousness.
different. Of the kind
The
of
heat
energy
of the
that
day
fills a room without
evaporates,
trying, leaving behind
and
a
these two
dry,
children,
crisp chill,
a
that
14-year-old
settles deep
boy
into the bones,
and an 11-year-old
the sodium
girl
streetlights cast a
were living
specific shade of
exactly the
orange,
kind of life that
a
children
heavy
at those
artificial
ages
glow
should be
that
living.
flattens the depth of the world.
They were in school,
Shadows
they were in a
stretched long
community,
and thin across the asphalt.
they were surrounded by the
reaching out from the
structures
base
and the
of
relationships
relationships
and
and
parked
the daily
cars.
routines that make up a
In the
childhood. distance, the I-10
the home
freeway
they
lived
hums
in with
was
a low,
their home.
constant vibration. The
A
place
reminder
that
that
was
somewhere
supposed to be the
people are
safest
still
place
moving.
in the world for them.
But here,
in the stillness, the place where the doors
air
closed
tastes of
against
dust
whatever
and
was
dry
difficult
sage.
about the outside.
The silence is not empty,
and where the people who
it is
loved
heavy.
them were closest.
It presses against the ears,
and that
the
home,
wind moves through the
in
scrub
family's
brush with a
3
dry
years
rattle.
in Lakewood Ranch,
And the stars overhead
had been a
look
home with
cold
no
and
history of
distant,
police calls,
watching over a sleeping
no incidents
city
recorded
where
at that
thousands
address,
of lives are tucked away,
no moments
behind
that had
locked
drawn the
doors.
attention of law enforcement, or
But in the modern
suggested
world,
to anyone in the community,
the search for
that
connection
something was wrong often begins not
And I
in the
want you to
physical
pause
world
here
for just a
but
moment,
in the
digital one,
and sit with that.
Trust is often built on the
Because
fragile
it is
foundation
important.
of words.
It is one of the most
typed
important
into the
details
silence
in
of
this
the
story.
night. Yesenia,
The fact that
like
this
so many
house and
others,
this family
sought
existed
to
in
bridge
the
the
world
gap of
in
loneliness
a way that
through the
gave
glowing
no
visible
blue screen
indication
of a smartphone
of what was building inside.
The mechanics
of modern dating
and the
are
rain
simple,
outside
yet
falls
profound
gently
as we stay with
a
that.
swipe of a finger.
The family whose lives came to their end
that chimes
on the
in the
evening
dark.
of February 26th, the anticipation of a message that might signal the
was a
beginning
family
of
of
something
4.
new. a father
It is
and
a
a
digital
mother,
tether that
and their
connects
two children.
strangers across the sprawling
And 3
grid
years
of the
before
city.
the events of that February
Through this
evening,
invisible network,
they had made the decision
he
to
connected
leave
with
the
a
state of
man
Missouri
named Randall
and to relocate
Santillin.
to Florida, to the
We
Gulf
can imagine
Coast,
the exchange,
to the master-planned community
the small
of
bursts
Lakewood
of
Ranch,
dopamine with every
and the gated
reply,
neighborhood of the Lake Club.
the illusion of
And this
intimacy
kind
that
of
forms
when you trade stories
this kind
with a
of
stranger
deliberate
in the quiet
relocation.
hour.
It
to
is
a
easy to
place that
project
has
our
been
hopes
chosen
onto the
for
blank
quality
slate
of a
of its
profile
community
picture and the safety
on
of its
January
environment,
15th,
and the
decision was made
it
to
offers to children. As the sun
is
set,
the kind of move
painting the
that
desert
families
in
make
shades
when
of
they are
gold
thinking
and violet,
about
the future. Yesenia stepped out
when they
into
are
the cooling
asking air.
themselves what kind of
She
life they
believed
want
she
to
was
build
heading toward
and
a
what
new
kind of
beginning.
environment they want their children to
She
grow
did
up
not
in.
know that the digital
And
tether
the family
was
had
pulling
built
her
a life
toward a
in
Lakewood
silence
ranch
that would last forever, had settled into the rhythms of
Apartment
the community,
walls are thick enough to
had
hold
enrolled the
secrets,
children in school, and the complex in
had
Tolleson
become,
stood
in
quiet
whatever
under
way
the winter
a family
stars.
becomes part of a
Randall
new place.
Santillin was
A
27
part of
years
the
old.
life of that place.
His apartment,
And
a
the
standard
father,
unit in a complex of
described in the
identical
official
doors
communications
and uniform
from the
windows,
Manatee
County
had
Sheriff's
grown
Office
quiet
as
as the
her in
homeowner.
recent weeks.
His
His
ex-wife
ex-wife
had
had
left
left in
February
December
26th,
leaving the
not at
space
home.
with that specific,
He was abroad,
hollow echo.
He was in
of
South
a home
America,
that is no longer
away from the
whole.
house in Lakewood
The
Ranch,
complex
on a
itself
trip whose
was a
nature
study
and
in
purpose have
anonymity.
not been made a matter of
Rows
public
of
record.
parked cars. And I want to say
The faint
something
sound
about
of a
that television
detail,
playing through a
about
shared
the father
wall. Being in South
The
America.
smell of
laundry detergent
because it is
from
not
a
a
vent.
detail that tells us
It was a
anything
place where
definitive
neighbors
about
nodded
this
to one
family's
another,
circumstances
but rarely
or
stopped to
dynamics.
speak. Yesenia
People
arrived
traveled
at
for
this
work
complex,
and for many other
guided
reasons.
by the map on her phone, and the fact that a parent
Guided
is
by the
traveling
trust she
does
had
not
placed
by
in the
itself
digital
indicate
signals.
anything unusual
She stepped
about a
through the
family.
door. The door
But it is
closed.
the detail that sets
And
the
the
events
apartment
of
in
February
Tolleson returned
26th
to its silence.
into motion.
Outside,
Because it was the father.
the traffic on the
from his
freeway continued
location in
its
South
endless
America.
loop.
The automatic
first
became
sprinklers hissed
concerned
to life on the manicured
who first
lawns.
recognized that something
for
was
Yesenia,
wrong.
time
Who
had
noticed
stopped.
that he was not able to reach
The walls
his wife
held
and
their
his
breath,
children, and the
that his
night
calls
moved on
and
his
without
messages were going
Phone calls
unanswered
went to voicemail.
in a way that felt
Messages
different
remained
from the ordinary
unread.
delays.
The specific
and
pain
silences
of not
travel
knowing
time zones
is a
and
dull
busy
ache
schedule
that
that sits in the chest,
and it was
the father
making it
who
hard
made
to
the
breathe.
decision to contact
It is the
someone in
glance at
Florida,
the phone every time
and to
it buzzes.
request that a welfare
It
check
is the
be
waiting
conducted
for a
at the
sound
family home
that does
not come. And that decision,
On January
19th, made from thousands
the official
of miles
missing
away,
person report
across
was
an
filed.
ocean, by
The
a man
gears
who
of
was trying to
bureaucracy
understand
began to
why
turn.
his family was not
Reports were
answering.
typed.
Databases
Was the
were
action
checked.
that led deputies to the
Police
door of the
officers
house in
asked
Lakewood
the standard
Ranch
questions
on that Thursday evening.
Their voices calm and practiced.
And I want you to hold on to that
The
image,
contrast
too.
between the busy,
The
paperwork-filled
image of a father
world
far
of the
from
investigation
home reaching across
and
a
the quiet
distance he
absence
could not
of the missing
physically
girl
cross
was stark. To do the only
The
thing
city
he could
continued
do
to
from where he
function.
was. People went to work to call for
They
someone
bought
to go and
groceries.
check on the people he loved.
They slept.
And the rain
But in the
falls
center of it
softly
all,
outside as we
there
continue.
was a void
where Yesenia
at approximately
used to be.
8:30
in the evening on
silence
Thursday,
does not
February
mean absence of
26th,
evidence.
2025. The digital
Deputies
world
from the
never
Manatee
sleeps.
County Sheriff's Office
We leave pieces
arrived
of
at a
ourselves
home
everywhere
the
we
gated
go.
community of the
Echoes
Lake
in the
Club
data
at
that
Lakewood
tell the
Ranch
story when
to
we
conduct
a welfare check. The investigation
Responding
turned
to
to
the
the
ghost
concern
in the machine
that had been raised by the
The
homeowner
invisible
who was
network of
traveling
signals
abroad
that surrounds us
and
all.
had been unable to reach his family.
Imagine for a moment
And the deputies
air
who
around
arrived
you.
at the property that evening
It looks empty,
were responding
but it
to
is
what?
filled with a
From
silent
the
pulse.
outside.
Would have
Millions
appeared
of
to be
invisible
a
lines
routine
crisscross
welfare
the sky,
check.
connecting phones
The kind of
to
call
towers,
that law enforcement
carrying data
agencies
through the
receive
atmosphere
regularly.
like a digital wind.
Calls from family members
Every time a phone
who cannot
connects
reach
to
someone
someone
they care about,
it engages in
and
a
who want to
handshake,
make sure everything
silent
is
agreement
all right.
that logs a location.
And most of those
time,
calls end in
and
the
an
ordinary
identity.
way.
This data
With a
travels
knock on a
from the
door
device
that is
through
eventually
the air,
answered,
down into fiber
or a
optic
conversation
cables
with a
buried
neighbor
deep
who
beneath the
explains
city
that the
streets,
family went out
and
of
into
town,
servers that hum,
or the
in
discovery
cold,
of nothing more
windowless
alarming
rooms
than a phone
It is a
that was
digital
left on
heartbeat
silent
that never
and
stops.
the deputies who went to
Even
the house
when the
in
city
Lakewood Ranch
sleeps.
that evening,
Investigators
arrived
began
without
to
reason
trace
to
this
expect
heartbeat.
anything different.
They pulled the records,
And yet, as
they
they approached the
triangulated
property
the signals and made their observations
placed
from
Randall
outside.
Santillon
and Yesenia Norman together
perceived
in the digital landscape on the
something
night of
about
January
what they could
15th.
see or not see from
The
their
invisible
position
map was being
outside
drawn
the home,
line by line,
that gave them reason to
connecting the
believe
dots
that
that led
entering
straight
the
to the
property was
apartment
justified.
in Tolleson. And the Manatee
The
County
data
Sheriff's
did not
Office
lie.
has said publicly
It simply
that
remembered
the decision
what had
to
been
enter the
forgotten.
property was based
The waiting
on
was
observations made from
replaced
outside,
by a grief that
and
was
that language,
absolute.
observations made from
On January
outside
28th,
is the
nearly
language
2
of
weeks
law
after
enforcement
Yesenia had stepped out
documentation
into the winter night.
The careful
Police
language
entered
that
the apartment
describes
in
the
Tolleson,
basis for a decision
the
that the law
timeline had run
requires
out.
to have a basis.
The scene they found
And the
told a
deputies
story of
entered
tragedy.
the home. There was no chaos.
And what they found inside
Only
that
the
house
stillness
in
of
Lakewood
a room
Ranch on that
where life had
Thursday
been
evening
interrupted.
in February.
Yesenia was
a
found
scene
within the
that
Randy
apartment.
Warren of the
Her
Manatee
life had been
County
ended by
Sheriff's
violence.
Office later described
The police
publicly,
report would later
using
note
the
the
word
details.
violent, the specific
And I want to
tragedy
stay
of
with that word
27
for a
wounds.
moment.
But
Not
tonight,
to dwell on it
we
in a
focus
graphic
only on
or
the silence
sensational
that
way,
followed. But to honor the weight
apartment
of it was empty of life, because when a law enforcement
Randall
spokesperson
Santillán was
uses
gone.
the word violent,
He had
in
left
this
behind
context,
the hollow space.
They are acknowledging
Left
that
behind
what the
the
consequences of
encountered
the evening
when
they entered that
and had
home
taken to
was
the
not
road.
peaceful, and was not
The realization
quiet,
settled
and was
over
not
the
kind of
investigators
scene
like
that
a
is
heavy
easy
blanket.
for anyone to encounter.
The man they needed
and
was
the
no longer
deputies
in
found
Arizona.
A 14-year-old boy
He
in
was
one
running.
room of the home.
He
Deceased,
drove through the changing
and an 11-year-old
geography
girl
of America
in a separate room
putting
of the
miles
home.
between himself
Deceased,
and the truth.
and in another room
But he
of
could
the
not
home,
outrun the
they found the
signal.
children's
The
mother.
flight of Randall
A
Santillán
44-year-old
was a
woman,
journey across the
also
spine of the
deceased.
continent.
And the scene
He drove
was
from
secured,
the dry heat of
and
Arizona
the investigation
into the red
began,
rocks of New
and
Mexico.
the notifications that
And then
follow
into
into
the
discovery
vast,
of this
flat
magnitude
expanse of
were
Texas.
set into motion. It is a
And
hypnotic
among those
thing
notifications
to drive across the country
was the most devastating one of
The
all.
landscape shifts slowly.
The notification
almost imperceptibly
that
had to be made to the
sharp,
father,
jagged
who was still
silhouettes
in
of the
South
saguaro
America,
cactus
give way to the low
the man
scrub
who had
of
made
the
the
high
call
desert
to request a welfare
The soil
check on his
changes from
family,
the pale, dusty
from thousands
beige
of
of the
miles
west
away,
to the rich,
and
rusted
who now
red
had to
of the
receive the
plains.
answer to the question his
As he
call had
crossed into
asked.
East Texas and moved toward
And
the
there
south,
are no words
the
that
air
adequately
itself
describe
describe
what
what
that
that moment must have been
The
like.
dry, crisp bite
I
of
do
the
not
desert
try
was
to
describe
describe
by
it.
the heavy,
I
wet
only
blanket
acknowledge
of
humidity, and I ask you to pause
Pine
here
trees
for
began
just
to
a
line
moment
the highway
and sit with it, standing
because
like
it
tall,
deserves
dark
to be
sentinels
acknowledged
on either side of
the
the road.
enormity of what
The
that
light
man
through the
received
windshield across an
softened
ocean,
filtered
in the middle
by
of
the
the
moisture
night
in the air,
or the morning, or whatever
the
hour
endless
it
blue
was
sky
when
of
the
the
call
west
came
was
through,
replaced by the low
and the
gray
rain
clouds
falls
of the
softly
south.
outside as we stay in
For
that
thousands
moment.
of miles,
What we
the
know
only
of the
constant
final
was the
days
sound
and the
of
final
tires
hours
on
of these
asphalt,
two children,
a rhythmic
the 14-year-old
vibrated
boy
through
and
the
the
frame of the
11-year-old
car.
girl, is
He
necessarily
slept in the
limited,
vehicle,
because the
watching the rearview
investigation
mirror,
was still in its early
watching
stages
the road
at
behind
the time
him,
of initial
unaware
public
that the
reporting,
invisible map was
and
still
because
being
the
drawn,
details of the family's
tracking
private
his movement
life have
from
not
tower
been
to
made
tower,
fully public,
state to state.
And yet what the public
At 7
record
in the
does
morning,
give us,
under the
is
soft
enough
light
to
of the
construct
Mississippi
a sense
sun,
of the ordinary
the
life
running came to
that
an
these
end.
children were living.
It was February 6th.
And the most important thing in
Randall
that record
Santillán had
is
reached
the
Biloxi,
statement made by
the
Randy
city that
Warren
sits on the edge
of
of
the
the Gulf
Manatee
of
County
Mexico,
Sheriff's Office,
where the air smells of
who
salt
said
water,
clearly and
and
without
without
qualification
qualification
flat, endless
that there had
line
been no
of blue.
prior incidents
The
at
arrest
the family's
was calm.
address.
There was no
No
shootout.
calls to that home
There was no
for law
high-speed
enforcement.
chase. It
No
was simply
history
the
that would have
closing
placed
of
this
this family on anyone's radar
The
as
digital
a family
tether
in
that
crisis.
had connected him to
And that
Yesenia
detail,
now connected
the
him
absence
to
of a
justice.
prior record, is both
Officers
a comfort
took him into
in the
custody
sense that it
without
tells us
incident.
these children
He was
were not
transported
living in
to
a
the Harrison
household
County
with a
Adult
visible history
Detention
of violence
Center,
or
a
instability,
building of concrete and
a
steel
source of
that would
profound
become his new
sadness,
world.
in the sense that it
He
tells
was charged
us
with
that
first
whatever
degree
was
murder
building in
and
their
kidnapping
home was building invisibly.
The extradition process
below
began.
the surface of what
The
neighbors
slow
and
administrative
schools
work
and community
of moving a
members
man
could
back
see.
to the place where his secrets
And Warren
had
also
been
noted
uncovered.
that the family had moved to Lakewood
The road
Ranch
trip
from
was
Missouri
over.
approximately 3
The long
years
drive had
before
led him
the
only
events
to
of
a
February
cell.
26th. We remember
And 3
Cece
years
not
is
for
long
how she
enough to
left
have
this
settled
world,
in,
but
long
for the
enough
light
to have
she
enrolled
brought
the
into
children
it.
in school
As the
and
legal
established
machinery began to
routines,
turn and built some
the
degree
voice of Jessica Nunez
to a new
cut
community.
through the noise.
And yet 3 years
I can't
in a
imagine,
new place is also
she
still
said,
a relatively
her
recent
words heavy with the
relocation
disbelief that accompanies
and
such
relocation,
loss.
even when it is
I just can't
voluntary,
imagine.
and even when it is
Who would
to
do
a
that to
beautiful
her?
and well-resourced
A
community.
GoFundMe was organized
carries
by
its
Catherine
own
Gassaway to
and
help
its
with the
own
burial.
losses.
The
The
community
loss
gathered,
of the familiar,
not just to
the
mourn,
loss of the support
but to remember.
networks that take years to
They
build.
spoke of a beautiful and bright
The loss of the
18-year-old.
neighbors and
They
the
spoke of her
community
potential.
members and the
They
extended
spoke of the
family
life she should
and
have
the old
lived.
friends who know you in a
We
way
tell
that
this
people
story
in a
to
new
acknowledge
place
that light.
cannot yet know you, to ensure that
And
her
it is
name
worth
is sitting
spoken
with
not
that,
just
in the context of
with
a
the
crime,
particular
kind of
but in the
invisible
context
pressure
of a life.
that a family relocation
The
can
tragedy
place on
is
every
part of
member
the
of a
story,
family,
but it is
including
not
the
the
children
whole story.
who have to
The
navigate
love of a
new
mother,
schools,
the memory
and new
of friends,
friendships,
and the
new
quiet
rhythms,
dignity of a
and
community
including
coming
the
together.
adults who are
These
doing
are the
the
things
work
that
of
endure.
rebuilding a life,
And so the
in
case
a
is
place
closed.
that is not yet
The
entirely
files are put
home.
away.
And the night
And the children of
returns to
this
its
family,
quiet
rhythm,
the 14-year-old,
the map
and
is
the
folded.
11-year-old,
the
were
road is
children
empty.
who had made that transition.
Let us return for a
who
moment
had moved from
to
Missouri
the
to
Arizona
Florida,
desert.
and who were living
The
their
wind
lives
is blowing
in
through the
Lakewood
canyons
Ranch.
now,
And
a
whatever
gentle,
those
steady
lives
breeze
look
that
like
cools
in their
the earth
day-to-day
after the heat of
detail,
the day.
in their homework,
The stars are
and their
overhead,
friendships, and their
millions of
morning
them,
routines,
burning in the
and
deep
their
velvet
afternoons.
sky. It is
They were
peaceful
lives
here.
that belong to real children.
Randall Santillan is behind
who had
bars,
real experiences,
and the threat has been
and
removed
real
from the night.
connections, and real
Yesenia is at
futures.
rest,
And
her
those
memory
lives
held safe
and
by those who loved her.
deserve to continue.
The story has been told,
And the rain
and the burden of knowing
softly
is lifted.
outside
Now
as we hold that. There is only the sound
The
of the
investigation
wind
into
and
the
the
deaths
steady
of the
rhythm
14-year-old
of
boy,
your own breathing. The 11-year-old girl,
You are safe
and
where
their
you are.
44-year-old mother,
Let the
was
silence
led by
of
the
the desert
Manatee
carry
County
you
Sheriff's
into a
Office,
deep and peaceful
which is the
sleep.
primary law enforcement agency
night.
for Manatee County, Florida, a county of approximately 400,000 residents situated on the Gulf Coast south of Tampa Bay. And the Sheriff's Office is an agency of considerable size and scope, responsible for law enforcement in all unincorporated areas of the county, as well as contracted services for certain municipalities. And the deputies who had entered the home on the evening of February 26th immediately recognized that this was a scene requiring the full engagement of the agency's investigative resources and the MCSO's Criminal Investigations Division, along with forensic specialists and the Manatee County Medical Examiner's Office, were called to the scene to begin the work that a death investigation of this nature demands. And the work of forensic investigation at